Welcome to At Your Service, the service management podcast on the CRM Audio Network, with your hosts, Sean Tabor and Scott LaFonte. Resco is a leading provider of mobile solutions for Dynamics 365. Resco Mobile CRM is an invaluable tool for the field service engineer working in field service for Dynamics 365. Other solutions from Resco include Route Planner, which combines geographic and calendar data, even taking into account variables such as traffic and weather, to ensure that your field agents plan the optimal route possible to their work sites. Resco also offers Inspections, which allows you to create, assign, complete, and evaluate field inspections with ease. Inspections enables you to shape every step of your inspection process. For more information on these solutions, or to request a demo for any of their offerings, visit www.resco.net. We thank Resco for sponsoring this episode of At Your Service. Welcome to another episode of At Your Service, the service-related podcast on the CRM Audio Network. And normally at this point I say, as always, well, there's a lot of differentiation happening on this episode. We got some big news. We got some different introductions happening today. So first off, as always, I'm your host, Sean Tabor. But not as always, my co-host, Scott LaFonte, he's a Microsoft MVP. Unbelievable. I'm very excited about this. How does it feel? Did you wake up? Do you feel different? Does water taste better? Air breathe a little better?
That's right. And it's Cristal and caviar every night now. It's fantastic.
It's pretty. I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty cool. I enjoy it myself.
It is pretty cool. I got my MVP jacket today.
That's right.
Already tried it on. Just in time for the balmy weather here in Tampa.
Well, it was funny when you told me about that, and you told me you got your MVP. I remembered all the things that I did as soon as I could, and you were doing every single one of them. Every link I got, I clicked on it immediately. Every distribution list I could sign up for, I signed up for it immediately. Anything I can order with a logo on it, I ordered it immediately. I will tell you that does tend to fade a little bit. But enjoy it while you can. Enjoy it because you deserve it. And also, she's not here, but Sarah Jelnick, the Dynamics 365 diva, she also a co-host of the At Your Service podcast, also an MVP. We are an all MVP podcast, my friend.
We are. It is an exciting time to be part of the CRM Audio Network.
Yeah, and I think the network is all MVP.
It is. We are all MVP.
Well, with the exception of Matthew Anderson, but he is a Microsoft employee, so we'll give it to him. Special shout out as well to the host of Power BI and More, Ulrich Carlson, who also got his MVP this week. So very excited for everybody related to the network, and congratulations to them all. So all that happy news established, we have a guest. Actually, on this podcast, on this episode, we have two guests. The first of which is, the man behind the curtain, the great and powerful Oz himself, our producer, Jim Lomas.
Pay no attention to this voice at all. I got to tell you, it's really weird to be back in the man-sized closet, Sean.
Many moons ago, Jim and I had a different podcast called the Mundanity Podcast, and he would record in the man-sized closet, and many an evening sweat terribly due to the size of the closet.
Because it's a tiny closet and it has a big air vent, so yes. It sounds really, really loud if I have it on. Thankfully today, not needed. So.
Yes, and Jim is a very large man, so you can only imagine. So. Jim, give us a little background outside of just being a producer of the At Your Service podcast, which we appreciate. Give us a little background on what you do for a living in the real world, and that'll get us started on why we have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, so I don't have one of those MVP things. I have P's though. I'm a project management professional. So I'm a PMP.
So you're an MVP of the PMP world.
Yes.
There you go.
If you write all my initials out, it's JRMSPMP. So you can visualize that. It gets a little bit crazy. So for 20 years or so, I was in training, instructional design, project management with a bunch of different companies in different industries, doing government work, doing work for the military, doing training for call centers, doing training for internal clients, things like that. So I had a lot of different experience doing classroom training as well as web-delivered or enabled training. Now I'm a happy-go-lucky professor who teaches the class is called Creative Presentation. Basically, I teach people how to talk at Full Sail University. So having a blast doing that.
Outstanding. So the theme of this week's episode is really instructional design and operational change or organizational change management. So after we talk with Jim, we're going to go to our segment with Hannah Farley, who deals with organizational change management, and I think you guys are going to get a kick out of all the information she has to share as well. So let's jump right in. What is, for the layman, what is instructional design? What does that mean?
Instructional design, yeah, that's always a good question. When you tell people you're in instructional design, they go, so you're a teacher. Right. And that's not necessarily the case. You can teach, but your job is to look at a situation, look at things like a needs analysis, and say, hey, what kind of training can we develop or deliver that's going to best address the needs of the company, of the employees, of everybody involved, of all the stakeholders. So it's more of a almost not on a higher level, like a project management type position, where you're looking at different factors, you're looking at the information that's got to be imparted, you're looking at the audience, you're looking at the delivery methods, and picking and choosing, all right, here are the best ways to deliver this information so that it meets the objectives of the company, of the organization, whoever is responsible for getting that stuff out there.
And how do you typically plan that design? Is it, because from like an architectural perspective, I know how we gather requirements and we come up with a entity model and design the forms and fields and that sort of thing. I imagine it's kind of similar, but a little different.
Absolutely. In theory, let's take a new software rollout, for example. Mm-hmm. In theory, your training ID, your training team is with you from the get-go.
Okay.
Being a part of that process,
right.
Talking about, hey, we're going to be rolling out a new piece of software. Well, what is the benefits to the people who are going to be the end user? What are the benefits to the company? Talking about all those big picture things, talking about the resources that are available, talking about the best ways that for this information, here are going to be the best ways to deliver that. In reality, what happens a lot of times is you get called in on the end of that. Mm-hmm. Hey, there's a new piece of software coming out. We need to train people. Right. And then your job is to make the round pegs and the square pieces kind of fit together as best as possible. But ideally, you're involved right from the get-go in those developmental stages.
So Jim, talking about that, I mean, how ideally, yes, you want to be engaged up front. How often does that typically happen, and how often are you really coming in at the end and trying to play catch up and understand everything that's been going on? Virtually
all the time. Now, because it's not usually anything malicious. It's just the way things happen. I'll give you an example. A big project we worked on in New York City, developing a call center, developing a data network for the city. We were there as the system was being implemented, developed, the whole deal. We were supposed to be working alongside the developers, working alongside the sysadmins, working alongside the maintenance professionals, who were out there actually working on the towers, and getting the information that we needed, doing our needs analysis, finding out the different tasks they were doing. Well, what happens is you've got, those folks have a deadline, right? They've got to have their system up and running. You've got a deadline. You're supposed to be training the people that work in these places. But if, from a sysadmin's perspective, I've got I've only got 80 hours to, finish writing my code and getting my software developed. Do I spend the 15 hours that this training person's bugging me for to help them? No, you're going to meet your deadline, right? You're going to get your stuff done. So the reality is that oftentimes you're coming into the end going, okay, how do we figure this out? How do we make this work? Another thing that's kind of hampered training, and this is the fault of, to be honest with you, it's the fault of the training industry, is e-learning has been touted, web-based learning's been touted as the fix-all, as the solution to everything, as the way to cut costs, as the way to do all these great things. It's like any other tool. If it's not done right, it's not worth. There's plenty of bad e-learning. There's plenty of bad online training that's just a glorified manual where you're just clicking to the next page and reading text. That's no better than me handing you a manual, a printed manual, to be honest. So there's a combination of factors. So usually you are playing catch up at some point, but every now and then you'll get a project where everything goes smoothly and everything goes from get-go. But especially when you're talking about some kind of development, where you're talking about having to get a product finished and rolled out, you usually are kind of playing catch up there.
So with your comment about the e-learning being the end-all, catch-all, be-all, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you find, distributed learning is very valuable, and if done correctly, it really can save money, and it can deliver really solid content.
Absolutely. Yep.
But what are the key concepts that you always strive to achieve in an e-learning situation? Are there certain types of topics that are better suited for e-learning? Is there, I guess, how do you manage that human factor of how people like to learn?
Well, what you're doing is you're looking at the people who are receiving the training. You're looking at the end users always. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've got an older workforce. Maybe you've got a workforce that has been doing something a particular way for a very long time. And I think you've all been involved in that kind of project, right? Mm-hmm. Where you've got this brand new software, which from an engineering perspective and from a company perspective is great. And that's what we talk about, right? We go, hey, this software will allow us to do this better. It will allow us to be more efficient. It will allow us to... But what gets sold to the workforce are those benefits that are benefits to the company. What often gets overlooked is what are the benefits to that employee?
Right.
This is going to help you. So it's a much larger question than just the actual delivery mechanism. Yeah. Usually in that kind of case, e-learning works really well for a variety of things. I can teach you to use software. I can teach you how to make this task happen. Mm-hmm. You click these things, right? You go to this menu, you make this selection. That can be done relatively easily, and it can be done with something as simple as a screen capture software. And a lot of times having maybe chunked up 30, 45 second, 2-minute bits of here's how to do tasks. That can be delivered over the web. It could be something that's easily updated. It could be something that's done very inexpensively. It doesn't have to be a crazy flash animation or something that takes a long time to make and a long time to develop. Having the flash part of it oftentimes can even be it could be a detriment, to be honest, because you're taking something that takes a long time to make, something that takes a long time to update, and something that takes a long time or a lot of money to make. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those easier technologies are better. Now, where you can do a great thing, and you actually should spend more of that time and money and resources, is the why, the context for all this stuff that's happening. Okay. It's relatively easy to learn. Here's where I go on the screen. I do this. But why am I doing it? Mm-hmm. What does it help me do? It helps me serve my client better. It helps me keep my records straight. All that good stuff. You talk about that context of how that training benefits the employees, and you get a lot better result. Because you get a lot of pushback when new stuff rolls out, right?
Right.
And a lot of it is justified because people are thinking, man, this is going to replace me.
Right.
You know, and that's even if that's not the case, that's often the attitude. Or I've done it this way for 10 years. Why should I do it any differently? Right. And that often gets overlooked. So it's stepping back and using that tool to deliver that message of, here's not only how you do it, and here's not why it's good for the company or why it's good for the organization, but here's why it's good for you. Here's what it helps you do.
And we get that a lot with Dynamics 365 implementations, especially with sales organizations. You have salespeople who have done things and proven that they can sell a certain way, and then the company wants to move to a different model to make bring all the boats up to the same level, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And pushback is something that we always see. So, Scott, I'm sorry I cut you off. You were going to comment.
No, that's okay, Sean. I'm used to it. No, I was going to say the same thing. I think a lot of times what we see in the communication is, hey, we have this great tool coming out, and here's what it's going to help the company with. And for the younger generation, maybe that's all fine and good because they're all about technology, and a lot of them have grown up with iPhones and iPads and everything else. But like you said, Jim, I think with as you get older into that generation and the generational work gap in the workforce, you get that pushback, and everyone really wants to know what's in it for me. How does this make my life easier? Does it mean I don't have to sit in front of the computer every night for 3 hours doing TPS reports or whatever else it may be? That's why I think getting that communication out early and often with little nuggets of information to say, hey, here's how this is going to benefit you, and this is what you have to get ready for. I think that creates the excitement a little bit. It's almost like waiting when you're a kid for Christmas.
Absolutely. And that's, to be honest with you, that's not even basic training. That's basic communication. That's what I teach my students in my class. You want to get people's attention. If you think about advertising, what do you see in advertising? They talk about what their product is, right? Hey, it's a new car. It's got leather seats. It gets this gas mileage. Okay. How do really successful companies communicate? They talk about why they do things. They talk about values. Steve Jobs has this, that famous marketing speech he gave in the 90s when that unnamed company talked about think differently and launched that ad campaign. He spent 20 minutes talking about marketing's about values. Communicating and connecting with people is about telling them about your values. Here's why we do what we do, and here's why that's important. And that connects on an emotional level. And to be honest, that's what drives behavior. Right. Facts. We see this now, right? Facts don't drive behavior.
Yep.
It's emotion that drives people's behavior. So you have to be thinking about that, even in situations where it doesn't necessarily seem to be applicable.
And talking about, since we are a service-related podcast, talking about a consumer of this content that you're designing, such as a call center, you can very easily get a clash of procedures, of perceived value from a previous system to the new, and how do you overcome those kind of challenges in that type of setting, given that they're very transactional, time is of the essence, and they don't have a lot of time to click and be off the phones?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, because you're talking about, hey, let's have a class, let's have a 2-day class for this. Right. Yeah, that's not happening, right? So that's why providing chunked, easily accessible material that's context driven is key. All right, I need to make this thing happen. I've got this situation happening. What's my, the client's calling in, they've got this problem. A lot of times people mistake that training, that what needs to be trained there as the problem, right? You need to know all these problems off the top of your head. Generally, you don't. Generally, you're working off some kind of troubleshooting flow. You're working off of a script where you're asking questions. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to upfront train that deep knowledge, that comes with the job. Train troubleshooting, right? Train that process of troubleshooting. Train customer service. Train how do I deal with a angry client. You focus in on what's really, really important for that person to do their job and be a contributor as quick as possible. That other stuff where they hear this problem, that they know already what the problem is, right? That comes with experience. You can't, it doesn't make any sense to try to train that level of detail because I've got a troubleshooting flow in front of me that's going to lead me there.
Right.
And that I'm going to follow anyway.
One of the successful approaches I've seen in the past, especially when implementing something like Unified Service Desk, which is the Dynamics 365 version of a call center app, essentially, is the ability to manage and provide scripting. So, to your point, if you're teaching the over hierarching process, and then you allow the software to guide you through that process, as opposed to the other way around, it does seem to be a lot more effective. And that change management sometimes seems a little bit easier because they have an immediate perceived value in the fact that you're giving them scripts. Yep. You're telling them what to do, and you're helping them based on the situational awareness of the software. There's capabilities we have with cognitive services, with workflows, with various triggers within Unified Service Desk that we can display and present different information on the client and customer that will help them move through that issue and resolve it effectively.
And if you're not teaching that step by step, that software piece, that stuff that can be delivered in other ways, that stuff that can be delivered in these just-in-time training modules, or these even a short flip chart where it's got some of the basic, hey, if I need to get to this menu, where do I go? Or if you have that contextual, even if you have that within the software itself, there's a lot of contextual hints and clues that's built into software these days. It doesn't make sense spending what will be a large amount of time doing that in a traditional training setting, because it's not something I'm going to have to remember off the top of my head. It's something that I can quickly reference somewhere else while dealing with the real issues that are my job. My job is not button pusher or menu selector. My job is customer service. Right. My job is dealing with the client. My job is helping them get back up and running as quickly as possible. So it's having that focus and making those decisions about what's truly important there is what helps you save time and helps you get that kind of workforce back and up and running as quickly as you can.
And piggybacking on that, how do you manage those kind of concepts across the globe where regionalities and localization come into play? Because, again, going back to the values, how they manage something in Europe may be very different than how we do it here.
Absolutely. Two things. You need buy-in from management. You need management making it clear across all the different divisions. This is a priority, right? Once you've got that, it gives you a certain level of credibility. I can't tell you the number of times in training where you've gone into a situation where you've been contracted to do something and it's not a priority for that group. It hasn't come down from their management. Their management hired me, but their management hasn't told them that this is a priority. So that sends that message right away of, well, this isn't really that important. So you need that buy-in from up top. And then you need to do that research. You need to know that about your client. You've got to know local customs. You've got to know how that particular audience can be best reached and how that particular audience can be approached. So that's where having a one-size-fit-all thing, which you generally do, the company spends a lot of money on an e-learning system or some kind of learning management system, and they expect it to be used. But culturally, that may not be the way that information is best delivered in another part of the world or in another, something like that. So that's where you have to be able to say, look, for this group, if you want this to function well, it's your job as the training professional to say, here's how I suggest that this be done. If it means going there and doing it in person or providing, alternate methods you make that suggestion, you make that clear, and you make the reasons why that's important known, and then you listen. When they say no,
right,
you tip your cap and you do the best you can. But
right.
It's if you have that management buy-in, if you have that kind of credibility, it means everything.
And a lot of what you've said today, it really has. I think our listeners are going to find that a lot of those statements are echoed in what Hannah talks about with organizational change management, and it is interesting because these two facets really, in order to be successful, have to work together.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because if you're not managing that change that you're delivering through your content, it could be very, very confusing for the consumer of this information and of this whole initiative, and ultimately lead to failure of the project. So.
Yeah, it is not dissimilar to any other organization within a company, right? If you don't have the buy-in, if you don't have that management backing, your boss may be telling you one thing, but the people who you're trying to reach aren't hearing that message.
Well, this was great. I think it's important to really understand your training initiatives and how this works within your project, how it ties in with organizational change management, and if you're an architect, a developer, you need to have some kind of understanding of this process during your design to help key off on those user experience kind of situations that can help the folks delivering the training content, the folks that are driving the organizational change to be more successful. So I thought it was really important to get you and Hannah on to talk about that, especially for for customer service agents, for field service engineers. It's just their time to mess around with learning is very limited. So you have to be crisp and clean every single time. And thanks for coming on. And I guess if anybody wants to reach out to you to complain about the audio quality of our episodes, how do they do that, Jim?
They talk to you. If anyone, I'm always happy to speak with anyone. Not necessarily about audio, but about training, about communication, about all those fun things. I will give you my email address, which is jlomas@fullsail.com.
There you go. And we'll put that in the show notes.
Complain to Joel Lindstrom.
Yeah, exactly. The Podfather. But thanks again, Jim, for being on. And this was fun getting you out from behind the curtain.
Absolutely. It was really fun to do a podcast where you weren't screaming at me, too. And calling me names.
This is true. Well, I guess with that, I think I'm going to throw it over to me to talk with Hannah. So, Sean, take it away. Okay. This week on At Your Service, we have a guest in the, I guess kind of like in the studio. It's in the Nerd Cave. But you're not actually in the Nerd Cave. You're across the country in California. And with us today, we have Hannah Farley, who's a OCM manager and architect. And that by itself is a kind of a cool title. I'm not exactly sure what it means. And we're going to go into a little bit more on that. How you doing, Hannah?
Hi, Sean. Thanks for having me today.
Glad to do it. So, reason why I wanted you to come on the podcast is one thing I find, especially in call center deployments, whether it's Dynamics 365 or any other call center software, there's a change management component to it, and sometimes that is left on the table. It's a result of if you need to cut some stuff out of the statement of work. I find that either training or change management is victims right off the bat. So I wanted to have you come on and talk a little bit about organizational change management and what you've seen in call center or global type implementations and how you dealt with that. and how you've managed that change. So first, let's cover this. What exactly is organizational change management?
Well, I'm glad you asked because I think in the technology world, there are two kinds of change management, and it often gets confusing. So there's the change management process you do when you're doing change orders and things like that. And then there's organizational change management, and it's a totally different thing. It really focuses on end user adoption of the systems and tools and things like that you're solutioning, developing, and implementing to an organization. And if you focus on the people side of the change, the human factors that make up the change, you generally have more return on investment. So I think a quote I heard a long time ago and something that I use pretty frequently is that you can have a technical success and a business failure. And I think that's very true. And so when you say, it's interesting to me that you say one of the first things we see cut out of budgets could be training or change management. And I think that's very true because for organizational leaders, it's really easy for them to focus on the tangible, the bottom line, the financial directives, the technology and all of that stuff, and expect to get their return on investment because we're going to go implement this and since we're doing it, people are going to use it. And that's just not the case.
So something interesting that you said, the human factor. Talk
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more about what that means, because to get a better ROI by focusing on that sounds very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So individuals make up an organization.
Okay.
Right? Individuals
Yep.
at a different level. And
Yep.
so these individuals, we have different experiences. We've grown up in different cultures, different historical backgrounds, different ways of learning, different ways of communicating and receiving messages, different fears in the workplace. There's a lot of uncertainty
Sure.
with organizations making changes and things like that. And so focusing on the human factors means incorporating OCM into that is developing a very well thought out and detailed plan and overall strategy to incorporate the human factors and to make sure that they understand the change that's happening. They've got line of sight into their future state. So how their role specifically is going to feed into the overall strategy of the company. And understand really what the impact of the changes mean to them. And to do that, we use sponsorship, learning strategies and plans, training. Learning and training to me are two different things. I think you can build out training material, but because you're building training doesn't mean they're learning it. And so there's a strategy that goes behind making sure that whatever they're doing is absorbed so they can go out and apply that information to make sure you're going to get the return on your investment. And developing resistance and reinforcement strategies also to account for all of the variances, at the individual level.
So would you say an example of learning as opposed to training would be part of that human factor to where you're helping them learn why you're making the change that you're making within the organization, as opposed to training them on how to use the software?
Absolutely. I think a big mistake that change management professionals and even training professionals make oftentimes is to go out and build some sort of training material to have someone walk through system steps. And they have to really, if you're implementing an organizational change, and when we're talking about this, well, I don't want to keep it so narrow that we're thinking of one specific software, because a lot of times a specific software implementation is a larger part of a digital transformation. And it's a larger part of the strategy of a company trying to move into a different direction. And so what that means for the people that are impacted is that their roles could change and they can develop fears about the value that they perceive that they're bringing. And so they want to hold on to the old things and the old roles and the old way of doing their jobs because they're unsure of what their future is going to be like. And so with the learning versus training is, here's how you log in, click here to do this, click there to do that. But learning, you're really incorporating all of the information they need, and that could be, through communications and different things like that, but all the information that an end user needs, a manager needs, a second line manager needs, even all the way up to executives, to go out and implement this change and understand how it's going to impact their own personal future state. And that is understanding the why we're doing it, the vision for the organization as a whole, how that trickles down and that line of sight into their own role in the strategy, why it's important, and what's going to happen if it's not, if the whatever this thing is that you're doing, whether it's downsizing even, right? That's an organizational change, how it's all going to be, impact them into their future state. And so developing a well thought out learning plan for that, to also that incorporates processes, because you can train someone on a system, but if it's not built into the organizational processes, the system's not going to be used. And so if you don't train on those as well, it's a risk to adoption.
Well, and now that you've mentioned it, I know it's attempted, but can you actually achieve true digital transformation without change management?
75% of all change initiatives fail.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a good number.
No, it's not. It's not. And that's, I could follow up with some information on where I'm getting my statistics, but you can research and find that information just about anywhere. 75% of change initiatives fail because they're not factoring in the people side of the change, and they're not considering the human factors of the change. And so when, if we're going to go out and implement some sort of a new CRM tool, but they're not building it into processes, and they're not considering the roles that could, global roles that could be using this system, and they go out and say, okay, here's day one, go use this thing, people probably aren't going to use it, because in order to make a change stick and keep it sustainable, you have to have certain things pretty well developed to get that to happen. And one of those huge things is sponsorship. It's the number one thing. And I don't mean sponsorship at an executive level, sponsors, developing and trickling down, cascading information through the different levels of the organization. You do have to have that as well. But I mean sponsorship by pulling in and creating buy-in from some of the peers of the people that are going to be impacted by the change, getting people excited about it. And so they're starting to see communications and things like that from the people who could be like a change advocate as part of that change network and sponsorship, roadmap that you've got developed to implement the change. So they're seeing this, they're hearing it. The change has been introduced to them. They're starting to understand it. They're getting more and more communications. We provide the learning and then the enablement there, and also develop some resistance and reinforcement tactics there to get them to adopt.
What kind of reinforcement and tactics are you considering in your change management plan? Does it vary by vertical industry? Does it vary by size of company? Or are they kind of consistent?
I think some of the overall strategies could be consistent, but when you get down to developing, if you're developing a well thought out plan, it's definitely going to be project based, company based, because you're going to face a lot of different things. And so one thing I think that would be applicable to all projects is developing an ongoing support model. And that's going to help provide the reinforcement needed and the support needed to sustain the changes. And by sustain the changes, I don't mean ongoing support model that just incorporates someone to contact for tech support. I mean someone to contact for process support, someone who's monitoring a continuous feedback loop, because these companies who are undergoing digital transformations now are also continuously improving. They're not going to go implement a software and stop, right? They want to go figure out, like, now we've got this implemented, how are we going to optimize it? How do we increase our return on investment? Are there enhancements that we can put into the software because our business is continually changing? How do we enhance and update and things like that as we go along? And so developing some sort of an ongoing support model would provide reinforcement for those factors.
And quite often in my Dynamics 365 implementations, especially larger enterprise level implementations, quite often we recommend the implementation of a data steward. So what it kind of sounds like to me, what you're saying is, in a sense, they larger firms with big digital transformation initiatives should have almost like a change steward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think organizations, a lot of organizations have this too now, or they're starting to, because they're realizing they're not meeting their return on investment. Something didn't work. If you build a $5 million system and no one uses it, how much is it worth? Not $5 million.
No.
Right?
No.
So they've lost that money and they're not seeing the return on what they wanted. So now organizations are taking a step back and saying, what do we do wrong? What's happening here? And most of the clients I've had over the past 12 to 15 years, I would say that's part of why they wanted to pull me in to do the work that I do, because they realized something went wrong. And the people who are implementing, people who are responsible, they're the people, their necks are on the line if they implement another tool that doesn't work. Why is it not working? Well, I can say, generally speaking, the tool always works. It always does what it's supposed to do. It's built on, stringent requirements. If you're getting proper requirements from a business, the tool is going to work. It's how you implement it.
And the reaction to the implementation itself, whether or not the requirements that you're getting are taking into account the actual users who are using it, or if the requirements are extrapolated out at such a high level from a 30,000 foot view from people who don't actually use the system, you're doomed to fail there as well, because you're not really hitting the requirements of the actual people using the system.
Absolutely. And so something that's very interesting about that, when you were asking me about global implementation at a call center. And so I think OCM, it's organizational change management. There are different methodologies, but it's a baseline framework for how you go out and implement change to create success and adoption. And I think, change initiatives are often conceived at an organization's headquarters with little local input.
Right.
And so if an organization group at a headquarter is designing and solutioning something, and they're going to go roll this something out globally, it can be difficult for a global deployment to be fully adopted, because a lot of times they haven't taken into account the regional variances, and not just for systems requirements, but also regional variances in culture and process and things like that. And so if those, a common mentality that I've experienced in my years of practice has been, when you get to those local levels there, they feel like they've been unheard. No one asked them for input, right? Nobody included somebody from their team, from that call center or from whatever organization, that this solution is moving and, integrating into. No one asked for any of their input. So then all of a sudden we go and say, hey, here's this thing, you're going to use it. And then they feel like a solution is being kind of pushed down their throats,
right,
if you will, and so it makes them resistant.
Right. And does the organization change management plan help uncover the kind of gotchas in order to avoid that, or is that not part of the initial plan?
It should be. And so, but this is where organizational change management should be involved at probably a requirements gathering stage. And a lot of times it's not. And so then we come in and figure out, now we've done this, we've built these things without the requirements, without gathering input from, the regions. So now what do we do? And so we go through and I always start with some sort of an initial assessment. And so where I'm looking at the change as a whole, the number of people it's going to impact, their perception of change, their history with change. Have they been promised a system for a while and they've gotten something that they weren't expecting? Have they been told they were going to be getting something for 20 years and they've actually never gotten anything, so they don't think this is actually going to come either, so they're not prepared for it? Do they feel like they've been appreciated by organizational leadership in whatever the headquarters office is, right?
Right.
And it could be down to, let's say we're producing, training and learning material for an individual level for end users as
Right.
part of a global deployment, but we
Okay.
didn't incorporate any language translations or any
So
variances
we
there.
deployed the training in English, and maybe we're deploying in China.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And what does that say to them? What do we care about?
Right.
Not them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Interesting.
they have to, they have to feel like they're a part of the change and that that they're valued, because when you do things like that, the people don't feel valued, and that's where you get a lot of resistance.
Well, so in wrapping up, what would you say are your top 3 change management things to really keep an eye out for? I'm sure there's more, but in your experience, what's the top 3 that have either got you in the past, or things that are pretty consistent that you always need to look out for?
I would say make sure you develop a strong sponsorship model, so you can build a relationship with people who could be your change champions, your influencers in the local regions. If you're doing, a global deployment, develop a feedback loop and understand the culture at those local levels too. Some cultures have a higher tolerance for ambiguity. Other cultures need very specific and measurable objectives, or they're nervous as they go in and move into a change. So do that. Localize your strategy and plan for everything. Account for the regional variances with culture, communication, different styles of leadership and management.
Okay.
Understand the global history there. Communicate often. Communication is a big deal too, because end users often feel like something is just kind of sprung on them, and we've had an opportunity to be communicating and create their understanding of the change and get them excited about it, and bringing them into that. Okay. One thing I would say too about especially global call centers. So with that being the topic that you wanted to touch on today, all change initiatives start with a baseline methodology that you want to go out and apply. And you have to build those things out based on the individual project, because it will change. And if you're doing a good plan, you're going to make sure that you're tailoring it to the needs of the organization and the individuals that make up that organization. But in global call centers are a lot of like in that factor. But one key difference, I think, is that people who make up a global call center, they could be a dispersed audience that support a dispersed audience. And so something, when we're talking about implementing something, sometimes we're talking about happy path. We're going to go roll this new system or tool out to everybody, and it's going to be a big bang on this day, and everybody's going to be live on it, and that's the reality. But that's never the reality, because we develop solution and develop in phases, and we release in phases. And so when you have a global audience, especially a call center, other global audiences are not this specific, but call centers could be in one location supporting 10 locations in different places around the world. And so depending on when those locations are supposed to go live with the system, they could end up working, and also depending on the project timing, how it's solutioned, and the people that it's scheduled to go out to and impact, they could be working on interim processes. So now, call center person number 1, this was your old process. This is going to be your process for 2 months. Then we're going to change it again. But not only that, because we're implementing this in these countries, but you're going to have to stick with your old system and old solution in these other 5 countries. You're going to do all of that stuff, but you still have all your old stuff you have to do also with these other people, right? And so their system usage is double, depending on who they support and at what point they're scheduled to deploy the new solution. So make sure you take that into account. And to me, it's something companies will decide they're going live. They just pick certain countries to do that with. They're like, okay, we're going to go live here, 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 and here. Not thinking about the impact to organizations within the organization itself, like a call center that has these dispersed audiences. And so you're asking a lot of your employees if you go to them and say, we need you to do this process while you're still doing the old process, and then it's going to change at this point, but not the old one still. You're going to use that for a little while. And so we have to be cautious of what we're asking people to do. If we really want them to adopt, if we're thinking about them at an individual level, and we're really promoting that and letting them know this is a line of sight into this, vision and strategy that we have and that we're moving toward as a company. And it's going to be painful for a couple of months, but we need you to work with us. And then if you go out and celebrate their successes when they're able to do that and they're successful at it, that goes a long way for reinforcing the change. And it also energizes them to go out and hold out for that other 2 months. They feel like they're a part of the team. They feel like, they are the people who are helping this vision and strategy come to light.
Now, and I know I said I was wrapping up, but once again, you said something to pique my interest, so I got to follow up on it. So by focusing on that third point, if you have disparate regions doing multiple different processes, how does that impact your ability to report effectively the ROI on the implementation? Doesn't that skew that a little bit?
It can, but it really depends on if you're building out your adoption metrics based on the users that are going live at a certain time versus building out metrics on, we've got 1,000 employees at these call centers and 500 of them are going live in August and the other 500 are going to go live in December, right? But in the meantime, some of those 500 are going to be working in double systems for opposite customers. It's building out the adoption metrics in a way to make sure they're using the system and tools and processes when they need to be using them and scoring it on that. And if they're not, if you build it out and it's measurable, and if they're not, then that's when you can go back and course correct and say, we need a new reinforcement plan. We've got to figure out another way. What we did didn't work. How do we go out and now get these people to adopt something that hasn't been working?
All right. And last question. How tightly do you try to keep your organizational change management planning to that of the release planning for a given implementation? If you have a call center implementation that spans over a year, you could have multiple releases within that time frame. Do you have to manage every release as its own change catalyst, or is it a larger change done incrementally?
I manage each as its own change increment. And so if you're talking like over the course of a year, we're going to have a release 1, release 2, release 3.
Right.
But in those releases, you could be doing different regions, right? So maybe release 2 is like a certain region in another region. And also at that same time, the people that were already live in release 1 are going to have some enhancements that are going into.
Right, exactly.
And so I have a strategy and plan for each different region, for each different wave of deployment.
Excellent.
Because if you don't, you're not going to reach the audience that you need to.
Exactly. And that's what made me think of the question. So that I've learned, my head hurts. I learned a lot. I'm not gonna lie to you. I learned a lot. That is awesome. Are there any books, any methodologies that you would recommend to our audience if they want to look at learn more about organizational change management?
Yeah, one of my favorite books and one of the first books I read about organizational change management was John Kotter's Leading Change, and it's a very easy read, and it was one of those books that kind of drew me in and made me realize this is one of the things I want to do for a living. I like this part because I'm also helping people, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, it's not just for the organization. It's getting these individuals through so they have a future at that company in that new role, right? And so his book is really great. Something our company will be moving to soon is, and they're already doing it also, but I'm actually working to be certified as ProSci, and they have an ADCAR methodology. They've got a book on it, and I'll give you the author's name right here. It's called ADCAR, A Model for Change in Business, Government, and Our Community. How to Implement Successful Change in Our Personal Lives and Professional Careers. And the author on that is Jeffrey M. Hyatt, Hiatt. And that's another good book too. But it's plentiful out there. There's a lot of information. Rick Torben, he's got a blog about change management and implementing change. There are a lot of great articles on HBR, the Harvard Business Review. Subscribe to that. And they're always talking about the cutting edge of integrating the people side of change into your systems, implementation plans. So it's very cool stuff. I'm a little bit of a change management nerd.
And I appreciate that. But we'll put that information. I got that down. We'll put that information in the show notes. So for those of you listening, just look on your show notes, and you'll get links to the books in that blog. Well, Hannah, this has been awesome. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I've learned a lot, and I hope our audience has as well. If anybody wants to reach out to you on the interwebs, where would they do that?
Yes, you can reach out on LinkedIn. Maybe I can give you my LinkedIn address to use there, because I can't think of what it is now, but I think it's just Farley.
We can put that in the show notes. That's no problem. Yeah. Any other vehicles you'd like to frequent?
Yeah, I have my personal email. I'm always happy to interact and take questions there. It's Hannah Marie Farley @gmail.com.
Okay, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, hopefully everybody's learned a lot about organizational change management. I almost screwed that up there. And I wanted to kind of keep this more agnostic from Dynamics 365, because we always talk about Dynamics 365 on At Your Service, but I felt that the topic of organizational change management, just with the concept of a call center, regardless of software, was important to talk about. And as you said, true digital transformation is going to carry past Dynamics 365 into other areas that your users and your clients are impacted by. So this was a great conversation. And again, thanks so much, Hannah.
That's true. If I could say one more thing too, Sean, to follow
Absolutely.
up on that. I'm thinking if we want to go in and make a difference for customers, and this is in regards to a Dynamics 365 implementation, we would be remiss to only consider Dynamics 365 as the thing that they're undergoing, the change that they're undergoing. And so that's why change management comes in, because we are looking at their whole environment and saying, what do we feel like is impacting them? And it could be multiple things. We take that and build it into the strategy, and that's going to increase the percent of adoption for 365 itself. And that time we'll have repeat customers. Right.
And that's just a way to solidify yourself as your client's best partner.
Exactly.
I think that's a great way to end it. Thanks,
awesome.
Hannah.
Thank you, Sean.
And now for the update from our friends at Resco, let's send it over to Agnes.
Hello and welcome back to another week's episode. My name is Agnes. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Resco. And this week we're going to discuss a little bit about inspections. So whether it's staff surveying customers in store, technicians going through checks of complex machinery, or insurance agents assessing the damage after a hurricane, inspections come into play in countless scenarios. However, there's a lot more to it than just someone filling out a notepad with, a couple of check boxes. To set up a successful inspections process, you first need to define the actual questions and create relevant questionnaires. Once those are ready, supervisors need to assign them to available staff, including all related information such as dates, times, locations, etc. And then the team in the field needs to, a really reliable tool to receive the information, complete the questionnaires, and send back the results, which all are going to be, of course, evaluated afterwards. And that's why we've created Resco Inspections, a brand new product from Resco, complete with a designer, a scheduler, an inspector, and an analyst application, where you can now effectively handle the entire process of creating, assigning, completing, and even evaluating the field inspections. The cornerstone of Resco Inspections is the brand new designer. This is a web-based tool, and it enables users to create a questionnaire and survey in a streamlined, data-driven UI. It's easy to use, and it's a comprehensive tool that's intended to be used by non-administrators who know the business and its processes, but don't necessarily have a technical or a deep technical understanding. And it's a straightforward, simple preparation of questions for an inspection by selecting from a wide variety of available question types. So inspectors can be asked to fill out checkboxes, select pick lists, scan barcodes, take and edit pictures, and so much more. And the questions can be actually marked as required or logic and can be added via the designer's configuration rules so that different questions appear based on previous answers. So pretty complex. And once the questionnaire is prepared and set up, it'll instantly be available to managers and, be able to distribute them out to their teams in the field. So team leaders, managers, or supervisors that manage their staff in the field, they'll do that through the scheduler. There, they can see the available questionnaires and information about the tasks, location, and schedules available for each team member. And the scheduler application allows assigning the created questionnaires and planning work for your field team. So based on the latest developments, it can show an estimate for the near future, as well as, for example, if anyone will be finishing sooner than originally expected, you can task them with an additional inspection in the field to help the team out. The Inspector mobile app for the teams in the field is based on the reliable Resco mobile technology. So it doesn't matter if they prefer working with smartphones, tablets, or laptops online, or even without connectivity, they'll be able to do so with ease. And the inspectors receive work from their supervisors via the application. So with the built-in calendar and route viewer, they'll always know where to go and when to be there by. Arriving on site, they'll be able to use the app to check in, check out, and when they start or finish the assigned tasks. Most importantly, they'll use the Inspector app to run and complete and send back all the questionnaires that need to be filled out. So it's fully functional offline. So even in rural areas or underground parking, nothing will stand in the way pretty much. With the inspections done and dusted, you can see the completed inspections forms and evaluate the results in the Annualist module. So whether you want to go through the questionnaires answers one by one or need a report with all the essential statistics, we will be able to provide you with the tools to discover all the answers that you're pretty much looking for. Resco Inspections is a new standalone cloud-based product by Resco with native integration to Microsoft Dynamics 365 CRM and Salesforce. This solution is already available with a feature-packed update currently scheduled for the end of our second quarter in 2018. So stay tuned next week and we'll have a bit more information for you. Thank you so much.
On behalf of myself, Sean Tabor, my co-host Scott LaFonte, and the Dynamics 365 diva Sarah Jelinek, we thank you for listening and subscribing to the podcast. You can reach us at voice@crm.audio. On Twitter, you can follow us, CRM Hobbit for me, for Scott at FLD Service _Guru, and of course at Dyn365 Diva for Sarah. For more information and content about what we spoke about on this episode and others, visit our blog at atyourservicepod.com. This has been At Your Service on the CRM Audio Network, a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC.